This is no speech for after dinner and no speech for after coffee. I am blown away. And most of you know I'm not often speechless, but this is amazing. Thank you all so much. This sort of journey on which so many of us have traveled, and particularly this part in California, in which Liberty Hill has been central to my understanding, my very grounding. It is the place where I connected, where my social justice heart was set free in Los Angeles. How many people here from Brooklyn? Okay, you know what tonight is? We're not going to be here long. So I heard about Liberty Hill long before I arrived in California. And many organizations in New York pointed to Liberty Hill as a beacon, as a place that was making remarkable change in philanthropy. Brooklyn is actually going through the kind of renaissance now that it was in the 40s when I was born. The post-World War II, there was so much happening. Bedford-Stuyvesant was a thriving middle-class community, and I'm so blessed to have been born into it. It's changed. And understanding that change is part of what led me to commit to social change and social justice. I went off to Howard University. Go Bisons, all right, we're in the house. And an upperclassman, a year ahead of me, a gentleman by the name of Stokely Carmichael, was holding forth on the lawn, on the quad, at lunchtime, making it impossible for me to make my way to class. And I thought I understood engagement and civic responsibility, but when Stokely Carmichael issued a call to Black Power, I understood something very fundamentally different than what I had been taught about my role as an African American in this society and what African American communities needed. It was there that I began to understand that change, not charity, for me, meant power, not charity. I was determined to go to Mississippi to good friend Ralph Featherstone do voter registration, and that proud West Indian gentleman known as my father told me I couldn't effing vote in New York. What was I going to tell people in Mississippi? In which case I was sort of dispatched back home to the safety, really, of the family and the community that tried desperately to protect its children from racism. Desperately. So I went off and found migrant workers on the eastern end of Long Island. Migrant camps. Before you get to the Hamptons, you get to migrant camps. No longer, they're wineries now. But back in that day, it was a modern form of slavery. And feeling, very much like a college dropout and lost, I started talking to migrant workers and then going home and talking to my father, who was a Rockefeller Republican. And he tried to justify that all the way through Richard Nixon. And I politely listened, but always challenged about this issue of poverty amidst affluence. And it was working in those fields alongside migrant workers and really them allowing me to use my voice, to share their voices, that I began to find a role that has been my work for 6 decades. So, getting to here tonight wasn't all serious business, and it wasn't all profound. In the 1970s, Dorothy Height, my mentor and friend, and the only woman, if you look at the video of the 1963 March on Washington, she was the only woman on the stage with the big 6 civil rights leaders. She was the only woman that headed an organization with thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of African American women. But you notice that she didn't speak. And so Dr. Height used to tell me in her deep moments of reflection that if you live long enough, you will see change. And one of the things that she had me do was work on the erection of the Bethune Memorial in Lincoln Park in Washington. Now you can imagine me with my afro out to here, my combat boots on, and Dr. Height calling me to the Nixon White House because she was over there talking to the Secretary of the Interior about this statue. And they found what they thought was the most obscure park, federal land in Washington, to place this statue. But it didn't matter to Dr. Height. It was a statue. It was on federal land. It was the first statue to a woman of any race and the first to an African American. And by God, she was going to have her statue in that park. Today, we have some appreciation. It took 14 acts of Congress to get a statue that was a gift to the federal government. People just didn't want it. And I learned the symbolism because what it represented was threatening. So there we were in July of 1974 in Lincoln Park unveiling this monument while the press was speculating whether Mr. Nixon would stay in office another week. And Mr. Agnew, I think the helicopters were landing to pick him up as we were there. So I thought this was just symbolism, but in the process of having to do what people do here in the industry and messaging, I had to really read and know that woman's life and understand. On the base of that statue is inscribed, "I leave you a respect for the use of power. I leave you a responsibility for young people." That was part of her legacy. As Mrs. Nixon agreed to entertain 200 of the 35,000 black women at the Rose Garden, I was charged with finding those 200 women. Dr. Height always wanted me to do what I considered the dirty work. I was like, how are you going to pick out 200 women out of 35,000? Who are they going to end up hating on, you know? So we hastily put together a couple of buses. They pull up to the east wing of the White House, and a woman from Los Angeles gets off the bus, pulls a gun out of her purse, and says, "Are they going to let me take this in the White House?" Truly, this is my introduction to public policy. There were guns, there was the FBI, the Secret Service, the Capitol Park Police, the DC Police, all descending on my busloads of women going to the tea garden to have tea with Mrs. Nixon. I spent that entire evening in the basement of the old executive office building, with the Secret Service. We didn't have any of this modern communication. And that woman had the most elegant defense for her action. She told the Secret Service, "I'm from Mississippi. We don't leave home without a gun." And this nice young man said, "But ma'am, you crossed state lines with an unregistered weapon." And she said, "I didn't cross any state lines. I flew here." How you gonna argue with that? So we left. I didn't have to go to the Tea Party. And so that was that. So these are the adventures that brought me to this place tonight. And I want us to leave here committed to making great stories, great policy, and having great fun. Those of you for whom this is your last or first or most recent Upton Sinclair dinner, let's commit tonight to building more support. I can assure you that my team will be busy tomorrow looking for mutual support groups for 12-year-old mothers. Nobody can hear that story. Nobody should hear that story and not know that we need to wrap all these young mothers in support. And I'm so happy that in this room are the people who work to end violence in Los Angeles, to support at-risk families, and that together that we are making change and building power. Thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you. See you next year.